Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I am joined by Travis Hahler. Travis transforms how Fortune 500 companies navigate change by revealing a startling truth. Resistance is not rebellion, it's biology. As Senior Director of Global Strategy and Transformation at Salesforce and founder of the Neurological Nomad, Travis brings an unprecedented focus on the combination of neuroscience and business acumen to organizational transformation. He has written a book, Rethink Resistance, which I highly recommend. It is a great human take on change and change management. And that is really what we are talking about in this episode. So we go deep into how the brain works, how the brain processes change, and all the different kind of negative elements that go on in our heads when we have some kind of change. And this could even be a positive change. It could be some success or promotion or new opportunity. Even that creates some negative thought patterns that go on in our head, creates some struggle, creates some sense of loss. And we talk through how understanding that and being able to react to that in an empathetic way can actually help people through change and help organizations through change a lot faster. Really fun conversation. Travis knows his stuff. I hope you enjoy. Here is Travis Hahler. Travis Hahler, welcome to the show. I enjoyed your book on the human side of change and am excited to dive into the conversation today. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this will be fun. I always like asking, what's the origin story to start? So you wrote a book on change. Why?
Rethink Resistance. It's actually a culmination of, I would say, the last 8 years of work that I've been doing, but it looks at really the last 2 decades. For me, what spurred it was, as I went throughout my career, I have a background in psychology and neuroscience, and I've done a lot of work in the spaces of like research and performing actually neuroscience type research, and then was like, I don't know what to do with that. So I put it to the side and I was like, I'm going to go into business. And so I got an MBA, went into business. And then I started to realize that they're not mutually exclusive, which I think is a realization that most people come to after going to college, because we kind of think that jobs are very finite, right? And I was like, oh, wow, a lot of the business pieces that others are struggling with, I understand very inherently just because I understand how people work. And so as I continued throughout my career and I saw how that was a differentiator for me in the way that I could connect with executives or connect with other people and help them really understand change and what was happening as we're asking people to change, I really started to latch onto this idea that neuroscience is actually an unlock for how you can lead really meaningful transformations, and in a way that builds not just your leadership, so you as a leader, but it also builds your relationships with your team and the way that you can support your people through it. And back in 2018, I started really exploring this more as a way of articulating change. And then in 2019, I spoke on it for the first time to an audience of 30 people. And I think I left there with, 25 people being like, I need to know more. Please come talk to my team. This is exactly what we're dealing with. And it took off from there. And 150 events later and 8 years later, we're at the point where I've talked to enough people who've gotten a lot of value out of hearing this, that the book became a natural extension of, let's actually codify this into a frameworked way of thinking about change and leading that change. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's something that we've been talking about for a long time, or at least I have. And so putting it into a book has been really meaningful, but also I hope that it gives people something that they can really refer to, that they don't lose after I'm on stage for 45 minutes and we talk about this.
Yeah. So just to start and summarize, what are the negative things going on in people's heads when they are asked to change? And we'll unpack some of these. So you don't need to go into super detail now, but what are some of the physical and physiological things that are happening when you ask somebody to break a routine and do something different?
This is the basis of the framework within the book, is that there's 6 areas that really cause natural resistance for people within the brain. And like you said, we'll talk about all of them throughout this, so I won't go into too much detail, but on each of them. But really, what it comes down to is our brain was designed for certain things. Our brain was designed for efficiency. It was designed for critical thinking, which helped us basically survive. And it was able to actually create ways that made it easier for us to survive and evolved to create those pathways for survival. So it all comes down to protection, energy, the way that our brain is operating. Change, in its very nature, threatens all of that. So it threatens, you need to use a lot more energy to change the way that you work and the habits. It's not as easy or as automatic. It also causes threat, right? There's unknowns, there's losses of relationships and competence. And this creates all sorts of turmoil within the brain. So the brain naturally doesn't want to go into those spaces. So as we change, we're having to push ourselves beyond what our brain is preferring to be able to actually take on that change and to make that change stick for ourselves. And that's the foundations of that natural resistance. That's really something that a lot of leaders struggle to comprehend as they're going through that change process with their teams.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the work required to change in your body? Because I think you hear it takes more work to change, and it's like, all right, suck it up, buttercup. Come on, we can do some work. But I don't like, it's not that kind of work. It's like actually burning calories and your body trying to conserve calories. There's actually calorie consumption in your brain that happens when you're asked to do something different than you're doing today. So can you just talk to what those mechanisms are?
Yeah. If you think about it at its very core, and this is like a very simplistic example, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of things that we do every day that we give no thought to whatsoever. Tying your shoes. Do you really think about tying your shoes? No, not really. And think about if every day you had to actually concentrate on tying your shoes the same way you have to concentrate on like reading and comprehending, right? Most people can only read so much in a sitting and they're kind of tired, right? And that's why a lot of people read before bed. It's helpful. It calms you and it helps you get ready for sleep. It tires you out a little bit. That critical thinking creates that energy consumption. And so when we go through change, you're not able to leverage all of that automatic built-in pathway that you've created over the years of doing your job the same way over and over again. You have to critically think about it. So in your brain, you're going from using your basal ganglia, which is where a lot of your repetitive habitual task information sits, to engaging your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is your executive center. It's got all of your critical thinking. It's how you assess your environment. It's all of those things. And if you just think about that, you're like, it makes a lot of sense that the prefrontal cortex is going to use a heck of a lot more energy to do something than the basal ganglia if you're thinking about habitual tasks. So it really does switch the area of the brain that you're using in that moment for that task. And to your point, it burns more energy. It just does. So you fatigue it a lot easier when you're trying to reestablish those habitual tasks or those repetitive tasks that you're doing. It makes your day a lot more energy consuming.
Yeah. I think a lot of people saw this. Like just the best example I could think of when I was reading the book is that when COVID started and everybody had to figure out working from home and your kids were at home and what do you do? And like all those routines, and everybody was exhausted at the end of the day. I just remember everybody being super tired at the beginning of the pandemic because we were all trying to get into new routines. And then you fast forward a year or two when offices started opening back up again, and suddenly nobody wanted to come back to the office. It was like these things that had been routines. Now suddenly people were like, oh God, I got to go do that. And it's so much and I'm exhausted. And it was exhausting to get back to the old routines. And it was interesting how fast that happened, how fast our bodies and our minds adapted, and then how much effort it took to change again.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I did a couple of talks during the pandemic. It was called Making Good Transitions or something like that. It's some type of title in that format. And it was really about the pandemic and return to office. And it was really centered around brain aware and brain happy ways to help people navigate this kind of hybrid life. And the first thing that someone said to me was, so is the Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the office, Tuesday, Wednesday, is that proven to be the best way? And I was like, that is actually proven to be the worst way to do hybrid working because you are switching every
You're
single day,
always
your
switching.
routine.
Yeah.
So it's better to do a week on, a week off, like if you were going to do it that way, because you have a break of a weekend in between, or at least do chunked timing. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like that kind of transition is really difficult for our brains because the routines are so essential to ensuring that we can free up that additional cognitive space to do all of the hard work. And if all of your day is hard work, then you don't have a lot left in the tank by the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about, we're thinking about change. We know that change is coming up, and you start the book off talking about inclusion. Why is inclusion important, and what does good inclusion look like when it comes to the planning process for change?
Inclusion is really important because the way that our brain looks at exclusion is very similar to the way that our brain assesses pain. So the same neural pathways and the same areas of the brain activate for both. So it's not one for one where you stub your toe or you're excluded, they're the exact same thing. But your brain doesn't really differentiate between the ways that it reacts to it. When we talk about exclusion, and I use the words exclusion is painful, and it's because your brain looks at it as if it is.
There's
And
actual
so when
pain.
yeah, like actual pain, and it's measurable. And so when someone's excluded from change, which change is naturally an exclusionary activity because it's a group of people who made a decision, they're asking everyone else to come along with them. So the only time you're included is in the fact that you have to do what they've asked you to do, right?
Yeah.
So that exclusion naturally kicks off that, that kind of hurt. I didn't know where this came from. Who's been involved? Why wasn't I involved? Like all those questions start to bubble up. And so that's a really easy way to kick that threat response in with the brain, and a natural way that people start to resist because every change feels like it's exclusionary. And
Yeah.
so you start that process, you're like at the starting line saying, oh, I already don't like it. I already wasn't included in this. And so I think the second part of your question was around how do we approach it differently?
Yeah. And I get
So
like, I
yeah,
get we can go to people ahead of time and we can ask for their input. And I think that's probably the most obvious way that I would think about it. But you can't go to everybody every time and do it. So what does good inclusion look like when you can't include everybody?
yeah, and it's so true. I work at a company with 80,000 employees. We can't ask 80,000 people how they feel or what we should do.
Yeah.
So I think and inclusion is a very scary word for a lot of people when we talk about change because they think exactly what you just described is, oh God, we can't possibly go to all these people and ask them their opinion. But when I talk about inclusion, I'm talking about not just the physical act of including, I'm talking about the way people feel as they go through the change. So for me, when I talk to our teams about inclusion, it's really about how do you create the space where, although they weren't involved in the decision, how do we make them feel as though they're empowered within the change itself? So a great example that I use with our leaders a lot is two-way communication is inclusive. Meaning if you're constantly just blasting information at people, that's exclusionary. But if you're asking for feedback, that's an inclusion mechanism. So that in itself creates that feeling of inclusion within your teams, within people's minds. So it can be very simple. I worked with a company a while back where we were trying to build some of these inclusion mechanisms in. And one of the things that they were really worried about was I just don't know how we would do it at scale. And I said, try something for me. You've sent out a lot of emails blasting information out. Send out an email that gives someone the ability to opt into a place where they can actually share their experience or share something that they think is missed. The difference in the way people interacted with those two messages was like night and day. And I will tell you, this company was about 20,000. I think 3 people actually filled out the linked, like, here, put this in the comment box. I think it was like 3 people out of 20,000 actually filled it out saying, this doesn't make sense for me. My team is unique, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't something that created a ton of extra work, but people reacted differently to knowing that there was a mechanism for them to be seen.
Yeah. I remember I interviewed a guy who runs an institute. He works for a university in California, and he runs an institute for like Indian work and studies and things. And he works with a lot of really low wage populations. And they did a study with a large employer in India where the company was not able to give a raise that year. The company was struggling and they were worried about retention through that. And so they made the announcement that they weren't going to be giving raises that year. And then they sent a survey to half the population, basically asking about employee sentiment. How do you feel about working here? And what they found was that the group that got the survey actually turned over less than the group that didn't get the survey. And so they were really nervous about it, because you would think on the face of it, we just told these people this bad news. They're going to be pissed. Why would we give them a survey? Now they're going to vent. Now they're going to be even more pissed, and they're going to leave. But what actually happened was they felt like they could get it off their chest, and they were heard, and they actually stayed.
Now, if you take that one step further and you actually acknowledge the themes of what you heard,
yes,
and then tie that to how you've changed behavior or the way that you're rolling it out, you like gold mine right there. People are like, oh my gosh, that meant something. They actually read it. They actually did something about it. And it doesn't have to be huge. I think that's the misconception that a lot of people have. Like, this could be very simple. It can be, oh, you don't like emails. Great. We'll move it to IM.
Yeah. Does this also include, I'm just thinking about when we were doing our return to work policy, our return to office policy at my company, we did a series of focus groups, cross-disciplinary. So there were salespeople and executives and frontline people, and there were people who'd been here for 20 years and 2 months and all over the place. But we couldn't do focus groups with everybody. But when the communications were rolled out, it was, here's what we've heard, and we heard this from these types of people, and so we're going to do X. Does that satisfy it? If I haven't been consulted, but I know that people like me were consulted and you did something about their feedback, does that make me feel better? I guess it could. I'm curious what your take would be on that.
Yeah, typically, yes. I think if done well, right? You really do have to be careful about how you group people in that scenario. So especially in organizations that are highly matrixed or highly complex, saying I took 10 salespeople and we got their sentiment, that was good. That's probably not going to satisfy the 6,000 salespeople who work in different industries, all this stuff. Probably not. But if you're able to look at like a smaller subset of a team and say, you know what, we pulled a manager and a non-manager, we pulled people in specific roles that were very similar across the team, that type, yes, typically we see a lot better response, especially from a neurological perspective, from people who are like, oh, that makes sense. It might not have been me, but O'Brien knows the same job that I do. So we have the same pain points. We've talked about them before over coffee. I know that's getting articulated.
There's also just like some authenticity in the story, right? Okay, I get the sense that they cared enough to take the time to really go out and do this versus that seemed really performative.
Yes.
Because we've all seen that, right? Like we've all been involved in groups or seen or heard stories from friends or whatever, where you're like, you can just sniff out the BS right away. And you're like, okay, sure. They like pulled this together, but they didn't change anything that they were going to do. Or this is always the way it was going to go. I'm in sales, and like we see this all the time where you sit in a meeting and they ask all these questions about how they're going to evaluate you. And then they hire their friend from college. And you're like, okay, that you can feel it in the meeting. You can feel that it was performative. So I think humans are pretty good BS detectors. But if you are authentic and you're like, hey, here's what we did, and you can see that is what they actually did, and here's what we heard, and here's how we're going to use it. Okay, maybe they didn't capture everything, but like, I'll give people will give other people the benefit of the doubt if they're trying.
Absolutely. You're totally right. And I think that's, for whatever reason, we all hire really good people, right? I don't think anyone at an organization, I'm going to hire the worst people. I'm going to hire the best people that I possibly can find for this role, right? And so we usually hire really good people that fit the company. But then we go down this interesting road of assuming that we can pull the wool over their eyes. And to your point, do some of those BS tactics that people see through that like right away. So it's not really going to get you very far because people can sniff that in a minute.
If you think you're getting one over on somebody, especially on a group of people, you're not.
Yes.
You're not. The only one you're fooling is yourself. So let's talk about the actual change process then. As we start to implement change, you had a great section in the book on learning. And I would love for you to just walk through how we learn, because so much training today is sit in a room, hear a training, go do your job. Or even more now is here's a virtual training where nobody's going to look over your shoulder while this thing runs, and then go do your job. And it's like, there's just nothing sticky about it. So can you talk a little bit to the process of learning and what are the key elements that make learning stick?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Organizations today, like, we often treat learning as an event and not a process. You do that one-time training but here we go. It's done. So in your brain, and actually there's a great habit loop kind of metaphor of the ways that you actually go through the process of learning and building those habits. And for people, typically, it's tell them what they need to know, give them the information in bits, like not the end to end, but let's focus on a very specific thing, give them a chance to play with it, and then give it a break. And it's actually in the break that all of the learning really gets sticky, because you've learned it, you've looked at it, you've engaged with it, and now your brain needs a moment to like actually take it all in and really put that to long-term memory.
And what does a break look like? Is a break just switch to another task, or is a break like let them go home for the day?
It depends on how complex the learning is, but sleep is actually a very important part of the learning process. It's when that you actually start to solidify that long-term memory. When I think about a break, I'm like, here are the couple things we're going to cover now, and then let's go home, sleep on it. And oftentimes when I look at training, people look at it as like a marathon. And a lot of that is logistics, right? Where we're flying people maybe to a place we don't really want to waste. We have them for 3 days. So 3 days of training, right? But the reality of learning is that sometimes having a break from the learning part of it is also really important. So letting them just go work for a day and then come back to learning the next day is a really great way to ensure that they're actually taking in the learning and that it's sticking for them. Because learning on its own is a huge process within, especially the prefrontal cortex, of taking all this information, making all those connections. It's exhausting. It's tiring. Everyone's been at the conference where you sat at a table for 8 hours and you went home back to your hotel, and you could have just gone right to bed then and felt like you could sleep for a day. That is learning, having those breaks, not just go home and sleep, but also like maybe we don't need to learn something immediately the minute you get up the next day either, is really helpful to give that space.
Yeah, the pacing of it and almost like the breathing of it. Are we inhaling? Are we exhaling? Are we taking something in, or are we just like letting it go for a second? And you need that rhythm of the event. And it makes it more fun too. I just think about events that were the most impactful, and there was a cadence to it. There was a breath to it. There was an in, go, take stuff in. And then there was like even just a little pause somewhere just to, okay, great. And the best events is when you don't even feel it. You're just like, you're just moving through it. You get to the end and you're like, wow, that was really good.
Yeah. And I'm by no means a learning expert. I have wonderful friends who are way better at the what's 1 hour of learning equal to like what's is that 3 hours of break or what does that look like? But to your
Yeah.
point, the events that are really successful are the ones where you move through different types of engagement, whether it's learning and then maybe you go do an activity, or then you're able to disconnect and do a little bit of your work or catch up on email. Like the ones that do really well with that kind of flow are the ones that, to your point, don't even feel like you're learning, but you leave there with a lot better of a stickiness than other events where you just like pound
Yeah.
learning all day long.
Yeah. I did an interview with a gentleman named Matt Dourdan, who's a professor of experience design at BYU. And if anyone's interested in what we're talking about right now, go listen to that episode because we talked a lot about this. And I shared a story there. It's not learning, but it was like one of the best events I'd ever been to for pacing was my own bachelor party. And my buddy took it very seriously, the planning for this. And we flew to Austin, Texas for 2.5 days. And it was packed with stuff to do. But somehow the way that he paced it was like perfect. Everybody arrived and went to a bar and had lunch. And it was just like, okay, it was a slow start. There was some relations, just some general conversation time. And then we immediately did an escape room, which put a bunch of people who didn't know each other into a situation where you couldn't have an ego and you had to collaborate. And by the end of that, everybody was like working together. But then we walked through town 20 minutes to get where we were going. And then boom, the next thing happened. But it allowed for that 20-minute walk allowed for everybody's energy level to come down and everybody to recover. And then we went to dinner and do the next activity. And then similarly, the next day, it was just like everything had just a little buffer. Just it was like, okay, we're gonna ratchet it up, and then we're gonna just let you exhale. We're gonna bring it back down, and as soon as we're recovered, we're gonna go again. And we all got to the end of that, and everybody was like, "Wow, how did we pack that all in without being like totally overwhelmed?" And so it was just such a great it's a weird story, but it was such a great lesson on pacing.
It's a great story.
Anyway,
Those are the best events.
Yeah, and it was a bachelor party, so it was fun. But the same applies to learning, right? Where you're bringing people together, you want them to build relationships, you want them to take something away, have certain experiences. Let's talk about time. You hit it a little bit. How should people who are about to implement some kind of change be thinking about time?
This is the one that makes me really unpopular a lot of the times, to be completely honest. I make the joke a lot. I'm like, I'm the least popular person in the boardroom whenever we get the timeline out. But for time, there's a couple things that you're trying to do. Really, it serves several purposes. One is anytime you need to learn, it takes time. So we need to pace it in a way that people can actually absorb the learning, like we were just talking about. There's also the habits of beyond that learning. So once people start using it, they have to build the habit, which takes time because the habit loop requires that reinforcement time and time again to make it more automatic. Then the final part of time, which I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily guess is a part of the time, is the fact that our amygdala, the area of the brain that actually houses a lot of our kind of like threat response and is something that can cause a lot of problems. But what you're trying to do is not overwhelm that area of the brain in particular with too much change too fast, because when you do, it essentially kind of shuts down and it protects you. Because when you get overwhelmed, what your brain is really trying to do is assess the threat level. It's okay, we're overwhelmed. We got to pause because I need to know, is this a fight, flight, freeze moment? And then once we know which one of those three it is, we can move forward. But when you're in that moment of overwhelm, as you would guess, you're not learning, you're not moving forward, you're not building habits, none of that. And so if you don't have the right time allowed, you run the risk of that overwhelmed state coming. And once you overwhelm too many people, it takes a long time to get that to subside. And so if you're not making progress during that time, you're not really gaining anything from that time frame at all, actually. And so you're actually losing out on that time that you could have spent. So when we talk about time, especially in the boardroom, a lot of times here are the things we're trying to achieve. And if we move it up to maybe we think it's 3 months and you're like, I want it done in 6 weeks, you kind of run the risk of getting 2 weeks worth of anything and then nothing for 4 weeks. And then you're actually worse off because it's going to take us another 6 weeks just to get people ready to learn again. So we're actually at the same place, only they've learned nothing and we would have been able to get them to the place where they are already in a learning state and ready to engage. Time is really an important factor, but it's very unpopular when it comes to leadership.
How do we extend time without losing momentum? Because I think that's a fear too, is if we slow it down, tasks expand to fill the time you give them. People will be distracted. They're more likely to fall off and not implement the change. We just need to get this done, force people to do it. They'll get used to it and we'll be off and running. Respond to that. What's your correct? Put me in my place.
No, that's exactly what it is, right? People, a lot of times the momentum is what's driving a lot of the desire to go faster. And momentum, it's like the marathon versus sprint analogy, right? You're assuming that we can maintain the momentum by sprinting. We might be able to maintain it better through the marathon, actually. And so from my perspective and kind of the way that I've seen it play out is that when we look at momentum and we're afraid to lose that momentum, you lose momentum because you don't engage people, not because you have to go faster or that you need to cut the timeline shorter. The engagement of people is what keeps your momentum. So that's how you communicate to them, the way that you pace the learning and the building of those habits, like you described in the bachelor party, right? It wasn't because you guys only had 3 days. It was because the pace of it kept you engaged throughout the whole 3 days that you kept that momentum up. You wouldn't have had the same momentum if you guys would have had no engagement for 12 hours. And then all of a sudden it was like, all right, we're going to go to dinner, right? That still wouldn't have been the momentum that you were looking for. So I think that's the misconception. And then when leaders really think that through, oftentimes where we have that negotiation is around what's the objective of the time that you want to spend? Because we can actually continue to keep the timeline long, but meet those objectives throughout the way too. So maybe it's small wins throughout that longer period of time that keep that momentum running. There's a lot of ways to keep momentum, not just condensing.
Yeah. What about when we're going through a lot of change all at once? Because in a lot of organizations, they get to a point where they've grown and now they need to change a lot of different things that have broken in order to keep growing, or they get into dire straits and they have to fix a lot of things in the business, or they get sold or bought or they buy another company or something like that. And it's okay, now we got to do all this change at the same time in order to be effective. We don't have 5 years to roll this thing out. We do need to be a viable business. What's the best way to be able to stack multiple changes without that overload, that amygdala hijack?
There's no perfect way to do it. And here's the trouble we run into in corporate change, especially, is that we only have visibility into the area that we have influence, which is within the work itself. So I only know that today I've asked O'Brien to do 6 changes over the next 3 quarters. That's what I know. I don't know that you're also going through when having your first kid, you're also moving, you're also like, these are all changes that happen outside of this. It's hard to gauge where people are at on that cognitive overload because you only know this much of their whole story in life. But from the perspective of multiple changes, oftentimes it comes down to how you brand it. And I think that's a lost art in change. I think we used to do that actually a little bit better, but we also used to have a longer timeline. So I think we had more time to spend on like, how do we brand this change? But what I mean by that is really when you think about a portfolio of change, if you think about that portfolio as 15 separate changes, that's extremely overwhelming, just naturally. But if we can look at those 15 and say, here are the 5 objectives we have for this year. We're going to reduce our time to market on our products by 30%. We're going to increase our ability to, our simplicity of our contracting. Whatever those 5 things are, if you build those 5 things and you can bucket 3 of those changes underneath each one of them, you just went from 15 to 5.
Yeah.
And that is far more palatable. So it really comes down to, what's your narrative? What's that overarching theme and the things that you're actually trying to achieve throughout the year that these individual programs are actually rolling into?
Is there a term for that? Because I talk about that all the time. It's, I don't know, cognitive bundling. Is that a thing? Can
we coin it right now?
That? Yeah.
I like it.
I talk about it in terms of what we do too, because I consult with companies on their health plans. And when companies are putting health benefits together, you've got your medical plan, but then you've got the pharmacy plan, you've got the life, the disability, voluntary benefits. You've also got what we call point solutions now, where it's, if I have a muscle ache, I can do virtual therapy, or if I'm not feeling good, I could do behavioral health therapy, or there's all these different things that are out there, and I got to log into an app. And what I have seen is organizations are moving back to, like you're talking about, taking multiple things and putting them under one umbrella just to make it cognitively easier to process. You don't have to process 5 things. You just, hey, this is one thing, and there are components of it, because there are components of everything. But just know that this is one thing. And like you said, instead of 15, they're going to have 5, and it's much easier for people to process 5. All right, I'm going to call it cognitive bundling from now on.
I like it. All right, I'm going to latch onto that. What I'll say around that is, no, I don't have a term for it, but except for it's now cognitive bundling because we've said it and put it into this world. But what happens too is not just like, this simplifies that there's 5 things that we're trying to do. What it also does is, oftentimes people get confused about why we're prioritizing certain work over other work. An example, I was working with a large organization, and they went out and said, here are all the pain points. Like, they assessed all the pain points in their workflow, and they said, okay, here are all the pain points. And then they prioritized a program that was really about inputting a lot of their sales information forecasting into a system versus using by team and by pod their own way of tracking. And the sentiment within the organization was, why the heck are we focusing on a reporting piece when we've got things broken in the way that we contract? We've got problems with our system. We've got issues with our authority matrix that gives us only the authority to give up to a 2% discount versus we're having to get approval for a 5%. These are critical problems that slow down our sales cycle in our business. And you had this like outrage of the company to be like, how dare you focus on this thing that we're not even sure is really a pain point? What the reality of what was happening was that the idea of where they were trying to go was to try to break out this business so that they could actually report on it to Wall Street. So because they knew the work that was happening was so important, and the pace and the growth that they were seeing was so important to tell Wall Street, to provide them with this idea that the company was ready to just take off. And that was all in part of how they were setting themselves up for this IPO. And had they bundled this underneath this idea of, we're going to be Wall Street ready for this IPO, people would have got it right away. And they would have been like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, we need to build in the reporting structures to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But because they didn't
people
brand
the
that,
why.
yes, because they didn't give them a good reason, people were like, I have no idea why we're focused on this. And the sentiment feedback almost entirely said, I have no idea why this is on our list.
Yeah. Let's talk about ambiguity, because that's another section of the book. You talk a lot about ambiguity. What happens to us when things are ambiguous? What's going on in our brain?
So the brain is really designed to make decisions, and it's taking in environmental factors and assessing, is our path the right path always? And are we safe? Are we able, are all of our needs met, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we sit in ambiguity, our brain doesn't just stop and say, oh, ambiguous situation, so we can just take a pause. We'll just break for a while. And then once things are less ambiguous, we'll come back and assess the environment again. I wish that's what happened, because it'd be a lot easier. But what actually happens is the brain says, oh, okay, we don't have the information we need, but I am a great storage of years of experience that can maybe make something make sense here. So what we do is we kind of rummage through all of our brain learned experiences, and we say, you know what, the last time we saw the market do this, or the last time I got an email like that, or the last time we acquired a company, like this is what happened. And then we start to create a narrative.
Well, and I bet that we always give other people the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely. No, almost 100% of the time it is negative, right? So and the reason, because your brain is looking for threat. So you're always
trying to protect yourself.
Worst case scenario is the thing you're always preparing for. So in those moments, your brain is, okay, last time, the company sold, people were laid off, we all lost jobs. Like that's the place that our head goes to immediately. And so then you build this rumor mill moment of everyone looking at it and saying, oh, what's the potential worst situation that could come so I can prepare myself for it? And so that's really the crux of ambiguity, is that when we allow people to sit in it, they automatically go negative and they automatically start defining a story that once they've defined it based on experience, you are hard pressed to tell them they're wrong, right? Because they're like, nah, my experience tells me that. And to your point, we're extremely good BS detectors, and we trust our experiences far more than we trust what some person says, right? Yeah. Unless that person is a very close confidant. So it's really hard to get people out of that narrative rut that you sit in.
Yeah, which goes back to your earlier point a couple minutes ago. You got to tell people the why. You have to give them the story because they're going to create a story anyway. I've said that on here before. I've just seen that to be true so many times. It's like, there is a story. Either you're going to control it or they're going to control it. And if you're not controlling it, they definitely are. And there's probably more than one, and it's not what you want it to be.
It's never what you want it to be. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, for sure. That goes to, I don't know that I have a question here, but I see a certain type of leader say, I want to get this bundled up before we communicate. I want to take our time. I want us to have answers. I don't want to sit here and have to tell people I don't know because they're looking to me for direction. And so we're going to figure this out and then we're going to communicate. How do you coach those people? What advice do you have for them in how to maybe think about that differently?
There's a couple things that I think about. One, in today's version of transformation and change, that's been an impossible ask, right? Because we're moving at a pace that we can't get it all bundled up. We're going to have to be talking about it while it's still being figured out in many cases. Maybe my view is skewed a little bit. I work in tech, and so we move very fast. We're always building while we're communicating. But I think that's pretty regular from what I hear in other industries and the industries I've worked in, is there really isn't the ability to bundle everything up anymore. We're just not moving at that pace. But the other thing that I think a lot of leaders don't put stock in, and I think that they should, is there is something very powerful about going on a journey with someone. And if you wait until you have everything bundled up to communicate, you're now communicating from the mountaintop versus communicating from the front line. And there's something really powerful about a leader that stands next to you on the front lines and helps you through a change that they're also going through at the same time, and that they can be relatable, real, and personable about what's happening. And so I think that's a missed opportunity, because that builds such camaraderie within a team, is when you as a leader are there and you're supporting them actively in the moment, and you're being vulnerable about the fact that, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. And quite frankly, I have the same question, but we're going to get there. And I guarantee you, we will do it together. That is really powerful. And I think people should definitely put more stock into that in terms of the importance of it.
So I don't think these things conflict, but I want you to help me reconcile them, which I hear what you're saying there, and I agree. I also agree with what you wrote in the book about the importance of clarity, consistency, and safety when we're communicating these things. Can you talk about why clarity, consistency, and safety is important, and how do you reconcile that with, I don't fully know where we're going?
Yeah, and I can totally see why that would be a question. So for me, clarity, consistency, and safety are a couple of very powerful things that exist within this ecosystem. So clarity is ensuring that you're providing visibility and transparency into what's happening, right? So that clarity about this is where we're going, this is what I know, here's the information that exists. That's the clarity piece. The safety piece is the environment that we sit in is one where you can ask me the hard questions. You can actually say what you think. There's that psychological safety exists here, and providing people that space to really give you the information about what's happening in their brain. And that consistency is, I think, where there's a bit of the maybe the disconnect, but it's really meaningful connection actually. So consistency doesn't always mean that you're sharing information that you know. Consistency means that there's platforms for communicating that you maintain because people need to know when they're going to get information. And sometimes that information is, I don't know. But the maintenance of that platform is what's really important. So a lot of leaders, to your point, want to package it up and say, I don't have anything new to share, so I'll cancel that meeting on Friday because we got nothing new. That kills the consistency. So in conjunction with what we were just talking about around if being in the front lines with them and going through that change with them, having those moments where you're actually saying, I don't have anything new to share. And I don't know the answer to this, but I'm willing to hear your questions. Let's talk about how you're feeling. Has anything changed for you in those moments between our last meeting and now? So that consistency is really important. And it goes back to our conversation around ambiguity. If I'm sitting in an ambiguous state and I don't have any platforms, that rumor mill goes wild, right? I create the platform at that moment. If I am sitting in an ambiguous state, but I know actually we've got a bi-weekly meeting and this is where we've got a Q&A every time that has to do with this program, I'm good. I'll ask my question. Like, I think I know what's going on, but I'm going to ask my question that's going to help me like identify if that's actually accurate. That is what's happening with these platforms and that consistency. That's why it's so important, is that people will wait if they know it exists.
Yeah. This is good. I love this. The last thing I wanted to touch on as we come up to time here is the concept of loss. And you hit it a little bit right in the beginning, but part of change, I remember reading, I think it was in The Power of Moments, where it talked about transitions, specifically through M&A, where a company got bought and everybody was really struggling with it and they were having a hard time giving up their former identity. And the company actually held like a funeral service, so to speak, for the old company. And not in a like, oh, it's dead now, you're going over here, but like a celebration of life. Hey, let's bring back the old executives. Let's celebrate everything we achieved together. And then let's like fold up the flag and we'll put it away and we'll open up the new flag of the new company and we'll celebrate. We'll talk about the vision for where we're going and we'll like relaunch. And it talked about the ability to how that helped people process the grief of having a new company name, which is like grief for having a new company name. Again, come on, put on your big girl pants and let's go. So can you sorry, that was a long introduction just to say, can you talk about grief and loss when it comes to change?
Yes, this is one that I am so passionate about. I can't even fully articulate it to you, to be honest, about the level of importance that I think this is. But so let me put it into perspective. Oftentimes, the way that we approach loss is that it doesn't exist in business. It's like everything's just a gain, right? Everything we're doing, it's great things and people struggle with it.
How many stupid movies have the line, this isn't personal, it's just business? How many times has that line been uttered in real life and in fiction, and it's just nonsense?
Nothing's more personal than business, right?
Yeah.
But we approach it that way, and it's so interesting to me because we know that's wrong. Like inherently, we as people know that that's wrong. So to your question around like grief and loss, in the book, I talk about this idea that all change equals loss. And a lot of people, I feel, come at me on this one, and they're like, this is the moment I'm going to fight to the death on this. And they're like, oh, promotion's not a loss. And when you break it
Sure it
down,
is.
though, it actually is, because you're losing a sense of security, a sense of the unknown is scary, right? You're losing the relationships you might have built. You're losing the competence. There is loss in every single change that happens. Even giving someone more money equals loss in some way, shape, or form, right? It
Mm-hmm.
either makes complication, whatever it might be. So loss exists in every single change. And I go into a lot of detail about the three types of losses: relationships, control, and competence within the business world. But I like to talk with executives about the difference between how leaders and people deal with loss within their teams. And so we've all seen it play out in business, right? As a leader of change or a leader of an organization, and we're like, okay, people are going to be upset about this change. I'm going to go and sell the heck out of them on why this is so good. So I'm going to show up with my 87-page slide deck, and I'm going to just beat it into them that this is amazing. I'm going to use that silver linings approach. That doesn't work for a couple of reasons. One, we're great BS detectors, and let's be honest, some of the things that we say are great reasons why are not always 100% honest. And two, the brain does not respond to loss and gain in the same way. It significantly overweights loss to gain. So for every one loss, you need a pile of gain to even overcome that. So the numbers game doesn't work here. You're never going to get that number right. So if you look at personal life, what's interesting is we understand loss very well on the personal side because we deal with it a lot as people. And so I like to combine the two when we're talking about it, because it helps our leaders see just how ridiculous it is that we approach it the way we do in business. So the example I often use is you have a family pet that passes and you've got a very sad child. If we approach that the way we do in business, you just walk over them and tell them all the reasons why this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to them, right? We could do all these things. We don't have to feed them, walk them. That is not what they're feeling in that moment, right? They don't care about the fact they had to walk a dog, right? They care about the fact their dog is gone. And so the reality of how we deal with that is we'd sit down, we'd be with them, we might embrace them in some way, but we lead with empathy, support, and care. And that's how you help someone through loss. So that's not how we do it in the business world, but it is how we should do it. And acknowledging those losses that people have. And I will say, I think amazing leaders, the ones that you remember, the ones that you talk about for years on end, are the ones that do that.
Yeah. Makes me think of, I have two young boys and we have a book called The Rabbit Listened.
I love that book.
Do you know that one? And
it's my favorite book with my son.
Yeah. It's just about this boy who builds this castle and the castle gets knocked down and all these different animals come out and they all want to help him in some different way, but he doesn't want to do any of that. All he wants to do is sit and grieve. And eventually the rabbit comes out and the rabbit just sits there and just listens while he goes through all the same emotions that everybody else was trying to draw out of him. But he just needed somebody to listen. So I like that.
Yeah. Kids
there you
books
go.
For
We've referenced kids books, my bachelor party. We've gone all over the place in this conversation. Travis, I think that's a good place to stop. I do think that is an important concept, and I agree with you. I think in my own life, every time I've had a major success, and I've been lucky to have a couple along the way, I've had a lot of loss and a lot of failure, but I've had some success now. It always surprises me the negative emotions that come with success. Not that I'm not grateful or happy or thrilled when I get a success, but that it's coupled with a negative emotion. It continues to blow my mind. I guess I know it now, so I know to expect it, but I've totally seen that to be true.
It's absolutely the case. I said to someone the other day, they're like, oh, it's so silly. We're buying a new house and it's wonderful. I'm really sad about it. And I'm like, just because the new house is great doesn't mean you're not sad to leave your old house.
Yeah.
Those two emotions can exist.
There's a great YouTube channel called Shots of Awe. And it was this guy who probably did a few too many mushrooms, but he would just like riff on these existential thoughts. And he did one on how every great thing that happens is lined with melancholy or with some element of sadness as well. And that's what makes really rich experiences really rich, is that they're so powerful in the positive, but they're also lined with this negative. And it's just like, every great thing is that way. Like being with your kids is amazing because you know they're not always going to be kids. Like getting this big success is great, but it also comes with the loss of the position you had before, like you were talking about. There's always that combination.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so powerful.
Yeah. I love where this landed. I appreciate you coming on. I would encourage people to read the book. I really enjoyed it. It helped me in a mentoring conversation that I had with a new employee just yesterday. And we were talking about the loss of competence and like how that person's dealing with it. And they were like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm feeling. So it really is a great book. I think it's a fresh take on change and would encourage people to go out. And we will link everything in the show notes where you can find it, all of that. Travis, anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
Just a huge thank you for having me on the podcast. This has been a really fun conversation. And I hope that if folks get anything from the book, it's just the importance of being a supportive leader through change is so important. And even just a little step goes a long way. And I think we talked a little bit about how there's a lot in the book that you can do, but it doesn't mean you have to do all of it. Little steps and little things that you're implementing make big shifts and changes. So don't underestimate the power of just taking some of the goodness and putting that into practice. And it doesn't have to be end to end. So
yeah, just make it a little more human. Yeah. You're on a show called People Business. So we buy into that here. All right. Good luck, everybody. I hope this is helpful. As I said, it's already been helpful for me. So I hope it's helpful for you. Travis, best of luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.